Hello everyone, and welcome back. What you are about to hear is based on a terrifying account that has been circulating on viral forums. A story allegedly based on true events from a Seoul subway worker. The location, the sprawling Dongdaemun subway station, a modern marvel built directly on top of centuries of buried history. This story comes from a night guard named Park, who believed his job was just about silence and cold fluorescent lights. Until one night, he was patrolling the deepest maintenance corridor, a place passengers never see. Down there is an old freight elevator, sealed behind a heavy, industrial steel gate. It's been locked for decades. As he walked, the silence was broken by a sound. Click, a sharp, metallic sound. Then, click again. It was the unmistakable sound of someone, or something, carefully testing the heavy lock. But these gates are massive. They are not supposed to move. He was completely alone. When he shined his flashlight on the source, the heavy bolt was ajar. You are not prepared for what he found on the other side. Stick with me to hear the full and horrifying story. And if you love these true dark tales, make sure to subscribe right now. Seojun's alarm was an assault. Not a gentle chime, but the shrill, digital scream factory installed on his 3-year-old smartphone. He slapped his hand onto the nightstand, missing the phone twice before silencing it. 6:30 p.m. The room was small. To call it an apartment would be generous. It was a gossy one. A shoebox stacked on other shoeboxes in a concrete block near Sinchon. The fluorescent light flickered on, illuminating the sum of his worldly possessions. A single bed, a narrow desk, a chair, and a mini fridge that hummed loud enough to be a roommate. His window faced a brick wall 2 feet away. This was the ordinary. He ran a hand through his unkempt black hair, his eyes gritty from a long day of lectures followed by a nap that had gone 2 hours too long. On his desk, his laptop was open to a half-finished PowerPoint presentation on supply chain logistics in post-war economies. This was his purpose: simple, grinding, and relentless. Seojun was an exchange student from a small town, poured into the pressure cooker of Seoul National University on a scholarship that covered tuition and this shoebox, but not much else. His purpose was to study, to pass, to get a job at a company like Samsung or LG, to make his parents proud, to not fail. And tonight, a subset of that purpose, Ji-yeon. His phone buzzed. A Kakao Talk message. Ji-yeon, study group. You awake? We're grabbing a table at the cafe. Don't be late this time. I'm not re-explaining chapter 4. A small smile touched his lips, quickly replaced by a jolt of panic. 6:31 p.m. The study group was at 7:30 p.m. in Dongdaemun. He was going to be late. This was the rhythm of his life. A normal, relatable scramble. He splashed cold water on his face from the tiny ensuite bathroom. He pulled on the same jeans from yesterday and a clean black hoodie. He grabbed his wallet, his earbuds, and his T-Money transit card. He didn't have time for the free rice and kimchi in the Gossiwon kitchen. He'd grab a triangle kimbap at the convenience store. He stumbled out into the narrow hallway, the air thick with the competing smells of 50 other students' dinners. Ramen, microwaved curry, kimchi stew. He hurried down the stairs and burst onto the street. The Seoul night was electric. It was a cold, crisp November, and the streets of Sinchon were a river of neon, K-pop blasting from cosmetic shops, and the sizzling, sweet and spicy smell of taeteok bokki stalls. Students, couples, and shoppers hurried past, faces illuminated by their phones, everyone moving with a relentless shared purpose. It was normal. It was vibrant. It was everything his tiny room was not. Seojun jogged to the GS25, grabbed his kimbap and a can of Let's Be coffee, paid, and was moving again in under 30 seconds. He ate while walking, shoving rice and tuna mayo into his mouth as he descended the stairs into Sinchon Station. The subway was his second home, a sterile, brilliantly lit world of efficiency. He swiped his card, beep, and joined the throng. He caught the Line 2 train just as the doors were closing. squeezing in between a woman laden with shopping bags and a high school student asleep on his feet. This was the definition of, "This could happen to me." The train was packed. He held a strap, put in his earbuds, and zoned out. The music a dull thud against the screech of the wheels. He was just another commuter, another student, tired, stressed, and focused on his simple, immediate goal: get to Dongdaemun, meet the girl, and pass the midterm. He wasn't thinking about history. He wasn't thinking about anything but the transfer ahead. He got off at Sindang to transfer to Line 6. Then one stop later, he was at the transfer point for Line 4. The journey was a blur of automated announcements and shuffling crowds. Finally, he arrived. Dongdaemun Station. It wasn't his first time here, but it was the first time he'd been this late. He started walking faster, following the signs for Dongdaemun History and Culture Park. The station was vast, a concrete labyrinth connecting 3 different subway lines and a massive underground shopping centre. But tonight, this late, the main transfer tunnel was less crowded. The shoppers were gone. The only sound was the distant rumble of trains and the echo of his own footsteps on the polished floor. He was hurrying down a long, white-tiled corridor when he first noticed it. The smell. The subway system has a specific manufactured scent, clean, slightly metallic, with a faint whiff of ozone and garlic from the food stalls upstairs. This was different. It was cold and old. It was the smell of rust, a deep, penetrating smell, like a handful of old, wet pennies. He paused, looking around. Maybe a water pipe had burst. There was no sign of construction. He kept walking, but the smell grew stronger. It was heavy, like iron. With the smell came a feeling. The air, usually warm and circulated, felt suddenly damp and still. The bright fluorescent lights seemed to dim, just slightly, as if they were struggling to push back a shadow. He checked his phone, 7:24 p.m. He was really late. He picked up his pace, breaking into a light jog. The corridor opened up into a wider atrium, where the station builders had famously, and with great pride, left a portion of the original Seoul fortress wall exposed. It was behind a massive pane of reinforced glass, a cross-section of history displayed like a museum exhibit. Ancient, heavy stones, stacked centuries ago. Seojun had passed it a dozen times, barely giving it a glance. It was just old stuff. But tonight, he stopped. The smell of rust was overwhelming here, radiating not from a pipe, but from the wall itself. He stepped closer to the glass. The user's inspiration text had mentioned it. To build Dongdaemun Station, they had pierced through the remains of the ancient Seoul Wall. He looked at the plaque. Section of Hanyang-doshong, Seoul City Wall, Joseon Dynasty. It talked about defense, kings, and preservation. It didn't mention what else they found. It didn't mention the forges. It didn't mention the shelters. He heard a noise. It was faint. Beneath the hum of the station, a sound so out of place. His brain struggled to identify it. Clink, clink, clink. It was rhythmic, a sound like metal on metal. He frowned, looking for the source. A maintenance crew. The sound wasn't coming from the tunnel. It seemed to be coming from the wall, from behind the glass. He leaned in, his breath fogging the surface. He wiped it away. The wall was dark, the stones shadowed. He could see the rough-cut earth where the tunnel boring machine had sliced through history. Clink, louder. This time, not a hammer on a nail, a hammer on an anvil. Clink, clink. HSS. A sound like hot metal being plunged into water. Seojun's blood went cold. He took an involuntary step back. This is stupid, he whispered to himself. He was tired. He was stressed. He was imagining things. He was in a bright, modern, normal subway station. He turned to leave, to rush to the exit, and the safety of the Starbucks where Ji-yeon was waiting. A new sound stopped him. A whisper. It was so quiet. It was almost just a breath of air, but it wasn't in modern Korean. It was a word, old and desperate. Yogi, here. He spun back to the glass. The smell of rust was suffocating. It wasn't just rust. It was the smell of old blood, of fear. The hammering had stopped, but the whispering had not. It was more than one voice, a faint, dry chorus, like dead leaves skittering on pavement. They were coming from the stones. His heart was pounding. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. He was a business major. He believed in supply chains and market trends, not ghosts. He looked wildly around the atrium. It was completely empty. Just him, the white lights, and the ancient wall. His phone buzzed in his hand, making him jump. Jion, study group. You're standing me up. I see you on the app. You're just standing there at the transfer point. He stared at the message. He looked up at the wall, the glass. His own breath had fogged it, but the fog was wrong. It was spreading, swirling in patterns that weren't his. And in the center of the fog, right at his eye level, something was forming. A handprint. It wasn't his. It was too small. The fingers too thin. And it was appearing from the other side of the glass. The whispers rose. A desperate, frantic sound. Charybda. It's cold. Bish. The light. Gwenchana. It's okay. Seojun didn't scream. He couldn't move. He was an ordinary character, in a normal environment, frozen by a past that refused to stay buried. The smell of iron filled his mouth, tasting like a new-cut lip. The handprint on the glass began to slide down, leaving a wet, dark streak. The train rumble returned, a modern mechanical roar that broke the spell. The sound of an arriving train. Seojun gasped, stumbling backward. He turned and ran. He didn't look back at the wall. He sprinted up the escalator, through the ticket gate, and burst out onto the street, hyperventilating. He was at the Dongdaemun Design Plaza, a massive, futuristic silver building that looked like a spaceship. Tourists were taking photos. A couple walked by, laughing, holding hands. It was normal. It was safe. His phone buzzed again. He looked at it. Jion, study group. Seojun, what is wrong with you? I'm coming out. He tried to type, but his hands were shaking violently. He lifted his hand to wipe the sweat from his face, and he smelled it. The smell wasn't gone. It was on him, on his skin. The cold, ancient smell of rusted iron and buried tears. The everyday setup was broken. The air in the sub-level was thick, heavy with the smell of old rust and damp, resting concrete. Alex hated this part of the patrol. Down here, the silence wasn't just an absence of noise. It was a physical weight, a pressure against his eardrums. His heavy-soled boots echoed with an intrusive, sharp clap, clap, clap on the floor, sounding far too loud, as if intentionally announcing his presence to the darkness. He reached the heavy iron gate that barred access to the old boiler rooms, a section of the disused Blackwood factory that had been decommissioned and walled off for decades. He pulled the massive, cold-worked gate shut. The hinges groaned in protest, a sound like a drawn-out, painful sigh that grated on his nerves. He fumbled for the heavy-duty padlock, his fingers stiff and numb from the subterranean chill. His fingers struggled with the key, the metal feeling colder than the air around it, almost slick. When the key finally turned, the sound of the mechanism engaging wasn't a satisfying, solid thunk. It was a thin, dry snap, like a chicken bone breaking. Alex frowned, jiggling the lock. It held firm. "Cheap piece of junk," he muttered under his breath. His voice absorbed instantly by the sound-deadening walls. The procurement office was always cutting corners. This was probably some $10 lock from a budget hardware store, completely insufficient for a gate this size. He gave the gate a solid, angry pull to confirm it was secure. It didn't budge. He turned his back, clicking his pen to mark the checklist on his clipboard. B-level gate. Secure. But the sound lingered in his ears, unnatural and sharp. It wasn't the sound of metal engaging metal. It was too organic, too cold, too final. It was the sound of something brittle giving way, not of something being secured. Just finish the round, he told himself. The beam of his flashlight cutting a nervous, wavering cone through the oppressive, tomb-like dark. 1 more hour, then I'm out, back to the real world. He had taken exactly 3 steps. Click. Wham! The sound was explosive, immediate, and utterly violent. It was 2 distinct noises. The click was sharp, metallic, and impossibly clear. The precise sound of the padlock he had just secured springing open. It was immediately followed by a tremendous wham that vibrated through the concrete floor and up through the soles of his boots. The entire 500-pound iron gate shuddered violently, as if a truck, or something with the same impossible momentum, had thrown its entire weight against it from the other side. Alex spun around, his heart leaping into his throat so hard it almost choked him. His flashlight beam snapped back to the gate, dancing wildly over the bars, reflecting pinpricks of light from the damp walls. "Hey!" he yelled, his voice cracking with an embarrassing squeak. "Who's in there? This is private property. Show yourself." Absolute silence answered him, a thick, heavy, waiting silence. He stared at the gate, his breath fogging in the cold beam of his light. It was still, and it was still locked. The big-bodied padlock hung exactly as he had left it. He swallowed, the dry click in his throat painfully loud. The adrenaline made his hands shake, and he tightened his grip on the flashlight. A squatter, it had to be. Some desperate soul trying to find shelter, trapped behind the gate when he locked it. Or maybe a large rat. He'd seen rats down here the size of small cats. Maybe one had knocked over a loose pipe or a piece of rebar on the other side. "Yeah," he whispered, trying to force the rationalization into his brain. A rat, a really big rat. Or the old building settling. Just settling. But the force was all wrong. It wasn't the clatter of a falling pipe. It was a single, purposeful, unimaginably violent impact. Thus, it wasn't the geriatric groan of an old building shifting. It was the sharp, angry punctuation of a battering ram. The gate was solid iron. To make it boom like that would take more than a misplaced step or a rodent. It was a demand. It was an act of rage. "This is getting ridiculous," Alex tried to reassure himself, but his eyes stayed fixed on the deep shadows behind the bars, and his feet refused to move closer. "I'm not paid enough for this." He knew he couldn't ignore it. Protocol was clear. Any sign of unauthorized entry, any potential structural failure. You call control. He unhooked his radio from his belt. He keyed the microphone, the static click feeling like a small comfort. "Control, this is Unit 4. I'm in the B level, boiler room access. I think I have a possible squatter. Heard a loud noise from behind the locked gate, Section 7. He released the button and waited for the familiar, crisp reply from Brenda at the main desk. Kshht. Nothing but pure, abrasive white noise. A rushing, oceanic sound that filled his earpiece and seemed to echo in the vast, empty space around him. "Crap," he hissed. He tapped the radio against his palm, a useless, nervous gesture. "Control, come in. This is Alex. Do you copy? Over." Kshht. The signal was always bad down here. He knew that. The thick concrete walls and all the ancient metal piping and machinery just ate the radio waves. It was a known dead zone. He'd complained about it to management 6 times. "Useless," he sighed, clipping the radio back onto his belt with more force than necessary. He'd just have to go up to the main level to report it. It was probably nothing anyway, just his imagination, amplified by the dark and the quiet, turning a settling groan into an explosion. The static wasn't normal, though it wasn't just the absence of a signal, it felt like the presence of one. It was a frantic, layered hiss, and for one terrifying, split second, Alex thought he heard a voice buried deep within it, a thin, reedy whisper that was drowned by the roar of noise before it could form a single, coherent word, a cold dread. far deeper and more invasive than the ambient chill of the room, settled in his stomach. He was alone, truly, completely alone. The protocol he relied on, the invisible electronic tether to the outside, living world, was cut. He stood there for a long, agonizing moment, the silence rushing back in to replace the radio's hiss. The gate loomed in front of him, a web of black bars against a deeper, more absolute blackness. The wham still echoed in his memory. He couldn't just walk away. If it was a squatter and they were trapped or hurt, he had a duty, but if they were hostile, all right, he said to the empty air, his voice sounding small and thin. I'm just checking the lock, then I'm leaving. He stepped closer, forcing his boots to move. He played his flashlight beam over the padlock first. It was pristine, apart from standard rust, scratched from use, but otherwise untouched. The heavy steel bolt was still firmly in place. He had not imagined the click. He was sure of it. It was the sound of a lock opening. But this one was clearly, demonstrably closed. His beam travelled up from the lock, tracing the thick, vertical bars of the gate. He was looking for, what? A dent? A scuff mark from a boot? He found something else. Near the centre of the gate, at about chest height, the thick black paint was wrong. He moved the light closer, his breath catching in his chest. They were scratches, long, deep, vertical gauges dug into the metal itself. He let out a shaky, high-pitched laugh. Vandals! Of course. Kids must have been down here earlier, trying to pry the bars apart or something. That's what they do. They destroy things. He'd seen it 100 times on the upper floors. Graffiti, broken windows. This was just more of the same. It was nothing. But these weren't from a crowbar. A crowbar would leave a deep, singular gouge or a pry mark. These were parallel, grouped in sets of 4 or 5. They were long, arcing lines where the black paint had been scraped clean away, revealing the bright, silver steel beneath. The edges of the paint flakes were sharp. This wasn't old damage. This was new. The light caught the metallic sheen of the exposed metal, and Alex saw, with a sickening lurch in his stomach, that the lines were thin, curved, and tapered at the bottom like, "No," he whispered. He leaned in, his face inches from the bars. The smell of rust was overwhelming, but underneath it was another, fainter smell, a sharp, coppery, organic tang, like old pennies or bad meat. He looked closer at the deepest scratch. It wasn't just paint. A tiny, dark, curved fibre was snagged on a metal burr. It looked exactly like a piece of a fingernail, a broken, dirty fingernail. His entire body went rigid. Click. Wham! The sound replayed in his head, but this time his mind rejected all rationalizations. The click was the lock. He'd locked it. The wham was something inside hitting the gate. The scratches were from after. He backed away, his clipboard slipping from his numb fingers and clattering to the floor. The sound was deafening, a gunshot in the silence. He fumbled for the radio again, pure, unadulterated panic overriding his rational mind. Control, control, come in. I need backup. Now, code red. Ksht. The static seemed to laugh at him, to hiss with amusement. And then, from the other side of the gate, in the pitch-black void of the boiler room, came a new sound. It wasn't a bang. It wasn't a yell. It was a low, wet, dragging sound, like a heavy sack of wet cement, or a body being pulled inch by painful inch across the concrete floor. Shh, shh, shh. It's a pipe, he stammered, his back hitting the cold, unforgiving concrete wall behind him. A broken pipe, leaking water. That's all it is. But the sound was rhythmic. It was deliberate, and it was getting closer. Shh, shh. It stopped, right on the other side of the bars. no more than 2 feet from his face. Alex held his breath, his flashlight beam fixed on the gate, illuminating the fresh, silvery scratches. He could feel a change in the air pressure, a cold, foul draft pushing through the bars, carrying that sharp, coppery smell right into his nostrils. He didn't want to see. He had to see. He was frozen, a new, terrible thought paralyzing him. The click wasn't him locking the gate. The click was the sound of the tumblers setting themselves. From the inside, he waited. The silence stretched, becoming unbearable. Then, slowly, from the darkness between the bars, a shape began to emerge. It wasn't a hand. At first, it was just a pale, grey cluster of something, a set of long, splintered fingernails, caked in rust and black filth, appeared first. They slid around the nearest iron bar, the nails screeching with a sound that went straight to his spine as they sought purchase. No, 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 Alex chanted, but he couldn't move, couldn't scream. It was a trick of the light, a hallucination, exhaustion. It wasn't real. The fingers followed, long, skeletal, and streaked with dried black fluid. They gripped the bar with an unnatural, cracking strength, the joints popping. The hand was impossibly, horribly real, and as Alex finally found the strength to draw a ragged, screaming breath, the gate rattled again, not with a bang, but with a steady, powerful, and very human shake. It was trying to get to the lock. The silence of the master control room was a fragile thing. It wasn't true silence, but the low, sterile hum of 1,000 electronics working in perfect, cold concert. It was the sound of money, of state-of-the-art broadcasting, and I had always found it comforting, until tonight. "Park," a voice crackled, sharp with static and something else. Annoyance? No, it was tighter than that. "Park, get down to MCR, now." It was Cho, our head technical operator. Cho never requested. He diagnosed and he fixed. His voice, stripped of its usual clipped confidence, was the first crack in the ice. I found him not at the main console, but huddled over the secondary bank, the security overflow monitors. His face, illuminated by the ghostly grey-green light of a dozen screens, was pale. I'm not the only one who saw it. Am I? I asked. My voice hushed. I had seen the flicker from the production booth, a microsecond of static that had no business being there. "You saw the static," Cho said, not looking at me. His eyes were glued to monitor 4B, the fixed-angle camera aimed at the heavy iron service gate in the sub-level loading bay. "But you didn't see this." He tapped a key. The feed rewound, then played. "It's just the gate. Cho, what am I—" Click. The sound was sharp, metallic, and loud, as if it had come from the speaker directly above my head. On the screen, the image stuttered. "Wait," I whispered, leaning closer. He played it again. The feed was stable. The dark, cavernous loading bay was empty, utterly still. Then, the click. Simultaneously, the heavy iron latch on the inside of the gate, a 3-inch thick bar of solid steel, slid half an inch to the left. The camera feed froze for exactly 1 frame. "I see it," I said, my mouth dry. "The latch, it's a system glitch, a corrupted frame buffer." "That's what I thought," Cho muttered. He pointed to a timestamp log on an adjacent screen. It happened at 01:14:22, and at 01:21:05, and at 01:28:48. He let the live feed play. We stood in silence, the hum of the servers seeming to drop a full octave. We waited. The digital clock in the corner of the screen ticked to 01:36:31. Click. It was louder this time. I flinched. The sound wasn't just in the speakers. I felt it in the console. A sharp, cold vibration under my palms. On the screen. The iron latch slid again. Another half-inch. The feed froze, then resumed. "There's no one there," I stated, the obvious hanging stupidly in the air. "There's no mechanism there," Cho corrected, his voice a strained whisper. "That gate is manual. It takes 2 security guards to pull that bar. There is no motor. There is no remote. There is nothing that can move it." He scrubbed the footage back and forth. "And look, every time the click sounds, every single time, the frame of the gate freezes. Just the gate. The timestamp keeps rolling. The dust motes in the air keep moving. But the gate itself, it's like the system is afraid to look." Afraid? It's the only word I have. Park. The system is rejecting the data. It's an impossible event, so the camera, it just stops. "Park?" A new voice. We both turned. Han, one of our audio engineers, was standing at the threshold of the MCR, her hand clutching the doorframe. She was supposed to be in audio booth 3, prepping for the midnight broadcast. Her face was ashen. "Han, what is it?" I asked. She, too, had heard the click, but not from the MCR. "It's in the walls," she whispered, taking a hesitant step into the room. I heard it, from inside the conduit. She pointed to the thick, metal-sheathed cable housing that ran along the ceiling. "It's loud, but that's not the worst part." Cho and I looked at each other, a new, colder dread settling in. "What's the worst part, Han?" "After the click," she said, her voice trembling so badly I could barely understand her. "There's another sound. I put my ear to the wall. I thought it was feedback, or a rodent, but—" She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "Park. Something is crawling in the metal." The next hour was a blur of denial. We were 3 hours from the live midnight news, the station's flagship program. Director Kim arrived, radiating stress and coffee-fueled impatience. I tried to explain. "Kim, there's a serious anomaly on the 4B feed, and Han is hearing—" "I don't care about anomalies. Park," he snapped, throwing his jacket over a chair. "I care about the broadcast. Is the feed stable? Is audio clean? Yes, but then it's not a problem. It's a glitch. Have Cho file a maintenance ticket. Han, you look like you've seen a ghost. Go get some air. I need you sharp." He clapped his hands. "Positions. People, we are live in 3 hours." Han shot me a look of pure panic. Cho, ever the professional, just nodded grimly and returned to his main console, his face a mask of false composure. No one else notices or believes. The formula for madness. The event repeated. At 02:17:44, the click came again. This time, it wasn't just one speaker. It was a deafening, unified crack from every speaker in the MCR. Director Kim spilled his coffee. "What the hell was that? A power surge?" "No," Cho said, his hands flying across his keyboard. "Sus! It's the gate." "What gate?" Before I could answer, every monitor in the 4 bank, 4A, 4B, 4C, 4D, flickered and died, a black void on the wall of screens. "Cho, we're blind on the whole sub-level," Kim shouted. "I'm trying. The feed is... It's not just dead. It's not responding. It's like the cameras aren't there anymore." And then, Han whimpered. The crawling sound had returned. It wasn't just in the walls. It was everywhere. It was a dry, frantic, skittering sound, like a million spiders made of brittle wire, scuttling through the server racks behind us, through the ventilation shafts above us, under the raised floor beneath our feet. It was a sound that didn't just enter the ear. It vibrated in the teeth. "What is that noise?" Kim demanded, finally hearing it. "Is that the HVAC? Is it feedback?" "It's moving," Han whispered, backing away from the wall, her hands over her ears. "It's not in the walls anymore. It's It's in the room. The skittering intensified, rising in pitch, a frantic cascade of metallic noise. It converged, focusing on one spot, the main server rack against the back wall. Click. The sound came from the server rack itself, a heavy, mechanical, final-sounding click. The crawling stopped. The silence that fell was absolute, heavier, colder, and more terrifying than the noise had been. The ambient hum of the MCR was gone. The entire room was dead, except for the monitors. "Oh my God," Cho breathed. The 4 black screens of the 4 bank flickered back to life. But they weren't showing the loading bay. They were all showing the same thing. A close-up. An extreme, claustrophobic close-up of the iron latch. It was no longer halfway. It was fully, completely, and irrevocably drawn back. The gate was open. "Who's down there?" Kim yelled, grabbing a walkie-talkie. "Security! Who is at the loading bay? I want an answer now." He got no response, only static. "Cho," I said, my heart a cold stone in my chest. "The camera, 4B, zoom it out, now." Cho's fingers trembled on the joystick. I can't. Park. It's not responding to me. It's a fixed feed." "What do you mean? You can't. You just..." "No," Cho interrupted, his eyes wide with a terrible technical understanding. "You don't get it. The camera is zoomed out. That's the feed. That's the only feed." My blood ran cold. "But if the camera is zoomed out, then what is..." Click. The sound came from directly above my head, a single, sharp, metallic tap on the ceiling tile. Han screamed. We all looked up. Click, click. Something was tapping on the tile, precisely in time with the blinking red live light on the main broadcast monitor. Click. And with every tap, the crawling sound returned. But different now. It was no longer frantic. It was slow, measured. The sound of something impossibly heavy dragging itself through the narrow space between the ceiling tiles and the concrete slab above. "It's right above us," I whispered. Director Kim, finally stripped of all his bluster, was staring at the main broadcast monitor, the one showing the live feed going out to the entire city. "What is that?" he whispered. The feed, showing our lead news anchor, was glitching. For a fraction of a second, her face was overlaid with a translucent image. It was the 4B feed, the open latch. "Get it off the air!" Kim shrieked. "Cut to commercial! Cut to..." Click. A sound so loud, so final, it felt like the building's spine had snapped. The ceiling tile directly above Cho's console cracked and sagged. A fine shower of white dust rained down on his keyboard, and every screen in the room, all 60 of them, snapped to the 4B feed, the open gate, the darkness of the loading bay beyond. "It's not in the walls," Han cried, collapsing against the door. "It's not in the ceiling. It's here. It's in the signal." She was right. I wasn't the only one who saw it. Cho saw the technical impossibility. Han heard the physical presence. Kim saw the broadcast aberration, but I was the only one who understood. I was the only one staring at the 4B monitor, at the impenetrable darkness beyond the open gate, and realizing that we had been looking at the wrong thing. The click wasn't the sound of a gate opening. It was a camera shutter. The crawling wasn't a thing moving through the metal. It was the metal. It was the wires, the cables, the signal itself, given a cold, crawling life. And it had been watching us, waiting. The click wasn't a glitch. It was a warning. And the thing that had been crawling its way through the arteries of the building had just arrived at the heart. It was another night, another shift, walking the perimeter of the sprawling, sleeping industrial park. The air was thick and wet. a typical coastal humidity that clung to our uniforms and made the gritty pavement feel slick under our boots. Han walked beside me, his breathing a heavy, rhythmic counterpoint to the distant hum of the transformers and the occasional rattle of a loose piece of sheet metal in the wind. These nights blurred together, a long smear of weak coffee, sore feet, and the familiar, mundane shadows cast by the high-pressure sodium lights. We were on the last leg of the eastern boundary, approaching the massive chain-link moor of Cargo Gate 4. It was always the quietest spot. Nothing ever happened here. The gate hadn't been used in months. Its heavy steel chain was looped through the bars, secured by a lock thick enough to stop a bolt cutter. Tonight, the silence broke. It wasn't loud. It was a small sound, alien to the night's usual symphony, a faint, dry scraping. Skrr, tsk, skrr. Han and I stopped simultaneously, our boots scuffing the concrete. We exchanged a look. His face, illuminated by the orange glow from above, was tight. "Rats?" he whispered, his hand instinctively moving to the heavy maglite on his belt. "Too rhythmic," I muttered back. "And metallic." Skrr, tsk, ping. It sounded like someone tinkering, working on something. Right at the gate. We cut our headlamps, plunging ourselves into the deeper shadows at the edge of the light's throw. We moved slowly, our training taking over. We fanned out slightly. Approaching the gate from two angles, the sound continued, oblivious to our approach. Skrr! Tch! It was coming from the base of the gate, right near the locking mechanism. My flashlight beam snapped on, a sharp white spear that cut through the gloom. Hands lit up a second later, our beams crossing directly on the source of the sound. It was a person. A woman. Judging by the slight frame. Hunched over. She was crouched low to the ground, her back to us, obscuring what she was doing. Her clothes were ragged, and her hair was a matted tangle, a vagrant, maybe, a junkie looking for something to steal, something to sell for a fix. "Hey!" Han's voice was sharp, the official bark of authority we were trained to use. "Security! Stand up! Show us your hands!" The scraping stopped. Instantly, the figure didn't jump, it didn't startle, it just ceased all motion. For a long, stretched-out second, she remained perfectly still, a frozen sculpture in the intersecting glare of our lights. The wind died. The hum of the transformers seemed to sink into the ground. Then, slowly, she began to rise. It wasn't a human movement. It wasn't the fluid, defensive motion of a person caught trespassing. It was stiff. It was mechanical. We heard a sound, a faint, grinding noise, like rusty hinges being forced to turn. She straightened her legs, then her back, each segment seeming to lock into place with a dull thud. And then she turned. Her head rotated on her neck with that same awful, grinding slowness. "Mum, I said show me your hands!" Han shouted, his voice betraying a new tremor. He was fumbling for his radio with one hand, his flashlight beam wavering. Her face came into the light. It was pale, waxen, streaked with grease and grime. But that wasn't what made my blood turn to ice. It wasn't what made Han let out a choked, gagging sound. It was her eyes. I stared, my mind refusing to process what my senses were screaming at me. She had no eyes. Not human eyes. Anyway, where there should have been white iris and pupil, there were just two solid orbs of dull, grey metal. They were not reflective like chrome. They were not polished. They were the flat, lifeless, galvanized grey of industrial hardware. They were pitted, scratched. I could see a faint, spiderwebbing trace of rust creeping from the edges where the cold metal met her pale, waxy flesh. They were, I realized with a sudden, gut-twisting lurch, the exact same texture and color as the heavy-duty bolt securing the cargo gate. The light from my flashlight hit them, and it didn't gleam. It just stopped. It illuminated the scratches, the imperfections, the flat, dead, metallic surfaces. Our beams were fixed on her, and her head was fixed on us. And then, the eyes moved. They swiveled in their sockets with an audible, horrific sound, a dry, metallic scraping. They locked onto Han, then they swiveled again, and locked onto me. I was paralyzed. My flashlight felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in my ribs, but the rest of my body was stone. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I could only stare into those impossible, dead, metal orbs. I saw my own terrified, distorted reflection in their scratched surfaces, a tiny, warped effigy of a man drowning in cold steel. Han had his sidearm out. I don't even remember him drawing it. His hands were shaking so violently that the barrel of his pistol scribbled frantic circles in the air. What in God's name? The woman, the thing, took a step. It didn't lunge. It didn't rush. It just advanced. The movement was jerky, a puppet-like thud drag, and with every step, a cacophony of small, sharp sounds, the grinding of her joints, the scraping of her feet, and a new sound, a high-pitched, electronic whine. It started low, like a capacitor charging, and began to climb, up, into a register that burrowed directly into my skull, making my teeth ache. She raised a hand. Her fingers were stiff, her knuckles swollen and discolored, looking more like corroded pipe fittings than human joints. "Freeze!" Han screamed, a raw, terrified shriek. Don't move!" And then she smiled. The sound of her lips parting was the sound of metal shearing against metal, a nails on a chalkboard scree that made me want to rip my own ears off. Her teeth, visible in the harsh light, were not teeth. They were filed, jagged nubs of dark, rusted iron. The whine in my head became unbearable. The light from our flashlights seemed to flicker, to bend around her. The world compressed into a pinprick of sheer, unadulterated terror. My eyes, stinging from the acrid smell of ozone that suddenly filled the air, and the strain of not looking away, betrayed me. I blinked. Just one, single, involuntary, desperate blink. In that fraction of a second, the world reset. The high-pitched whine vanished. The overpowering smell of ozone, gone. The figure, gone. I snapped my eyes open. She was no longer there. Not ran away, not hid. She was gone. The space she had occupied was now just empty. Oil-stained concrete and the chain link of cargo gate 4. The sudden silence was deafening. It rushed into the vacuum her presence had left, suffocating us. Han and I stood there, frozen. For how long? I don't know. A minute, an eternity. Our flashlight beams were still pointed at the empty spot, shaking. Han was panting, short, hitching gasps that were almost sobs. I realized I was tasting metal, my own blood. I'd bitten my tongue. "Did you?" Her hand finally whispered, his voice cracking. "Did you see?" I couldn't answer. I just nodded. A jerky, spastic motion, and then I heard it, in the absolute pressing silence of the aftermath. Tack! We both froze. Tack! Ping! It was coming from the ground, right where she had been standing. I lowered my beam, my hand trembling so badly the cone of light danced over the pavement. Tsk! Tsk! There was nothing there. No scorch mark, no footprints, no discarded tools, just the ground. But the sound was unmistakable. It was the sound of metal, the sharp, distinct, contracting tick of cooling metal. like an engine block after a long, hard drive, or a piece of steel just pulled from a forge. Ping, tuck, tuck. It was the only thing she had left behind, the sound of her fading temperature, the sound of her impossibility settling back into the earth. We backed away from the gate, slowly, never taking our eyes off the empty space. We didn't run. We couldn't. We were two trained security officers, armed, supposedly in control, but we were powerless. We were endangered by something so fundamentally wrong that our guns, our radios, our training, it was all a joke, a child's defense against the dark. The ticking sound grew fainter, and then it, too, was gone. We were alone again. Just me, Han, and the oppressive, damp, silent night. But it wasn't the same. It would never be the same. We finished our patrol in silence. What was there to say? How do you write a report about a woman with metal eyes who ticks? I can still hear it. Even now, in the daylight, I can hear it. The skr of her turning, the shk of her gaze, and the final, fading, ping, the sound of cooling metal. Did this chapter capture the horror? Let me know what you thought in the comments. Your feedback is everything. Please consider subscribing for more encounters from the night shift. The Gyeongwon office tel was a monument to flawless, sterile modernity. It was a sleek, 20-story blade of glass and steel, promising smart technology, soundproof walls, and automated convenience. For Seo-jun, a freelance designer who cherished silence, it was perfect. The rent was suspiciously low for its prime location, but he dismissed it as a market-opening promotion. The first month was bliss. The silence was absolute, a comforting vacuum where his creativity flourished. The second month, the click began. It was faint at first. Click. Just one. He'd pause his stylus, listen, and hear only the hum of his top-of-the-line air purifier. He blamed the building settling, new pipes, the Seoul wind. Then it became a pattern. Click, click, click. It was a cold, sharp sound, like a small, smooth pebble being dropped onto a ceramic tile from a great height. It came from the hallway, right outside his 14th floor door. 1408. He checked his smart peephole. The camera feed showed an empty white, motion-activated hallway. Nothing. Click, click, click. He started noticing the other tenants. The silent elevator rides were now thick with a shared, unspoken tension. People's eyes were shadowed. A woman on the 17th floor would clutch her small dog so tightly its eyes bulged. The forum on the building's intranet, once used for complaints about parking and recycling, had become a frantic, whispered rumour mill. Floor 12, 3 a.m. Does anyone else hear it? It's in the vents. I swear, it's in the vents. Management says it's acoustic resonance. Liars. The rumours spread, twisting and darkening. The land, they said, had been a potter's field, a place for the unnamed and unburied. Then, a failed hospital, shut down after a fire. The Gyeongwon office tel was just the newest, shiniest headstone. Management finally caved. They didn't hire an engineer. They hired a mudang. She arrived on a Tuesday, a tiny, ancient woman in vibrant hanbok that seemed to suck all the colour from the lobby's beige and chrome decor. She carried no tools, just a worn leather bag. Seo-jun watched from his window as she walked the perimeter of the building, not looking, but listening. Her head cocked as if catching a frequency no one else could. The ritual was violent. It took place in the main courtyard at dusk. There were drums, a piercing flute, and the clash of cymbals. But mostly, there was her voice, a jagged, guttural chant that seemed to tear at the air. It wasn't a song, it was an argument. She was scolding the very ground, bargaining with the glass and steel. She was performing a ritual to appease a spirit, or spirits, filled with han, that uniquely Korean concept of a deep, unresolved sorrow, a suffering so profound it poisons the soul. and lingers after death. Finally, she went to the main gate, the absurdly modern glass door that hissed open and shut. From her bag, she pulled a single, ancient thing, a heavy, rust-pocked iron key. It looked like it belonged to a medieval dungeon, not a smart building, with crimson cords. She bound it to the gate's steel handle, right over the electronic keypad. She splattered it with rice wine and wailed one last, long note. The building manager, in his slick suit, looked terrified. He asked her what it meant. Her voice was like dry leaves. "This is its lock," she said, gesturing to the entire building. "It is a key for a door that is no longer there." But the sorrow remains. "Do not ever take this down." She paused, looking up at the tower of dark windows. There is something here that does not know it has been buried. Twice, first by earth, then by this. The clicking stopped. The silence that fell was profound. It wasn't the sterile vacuum of before. It was a held breath. It was a truce. For 1 month, the Gyeongwon office tel was peaceful. The elevator rides became normal. People smiled. The intranet forum went back to complaining about delivery drivers. Seojun's productivity soared. He slept dreamlessly. He began to believe it was over. A bizarre episode of mass hysteria. Then the typhoon came. It was the worst storm in a decade. A screaming monster that turned the sky black at 3 p.m. The wind didn't just howl, it shrieked. A sound that seemed to mock the building's soundproof walls. At 2:17 a.m., Seojun was jolted from his sleep. The wind had stopped. The air purifier was off. His digital clock was dark. Fzzzt, ka-chunk. The entire building's power grid had failed. The emergency lights in the hall flickered once, then died. He was plunged into a thick, primitive darkness. The silence was absolute, and it was wrong. The held breath had been released. He sat in the dark for what felt like an eternity, his own heartbeat thudding in his ears. He fumbled for his phone, its light a pathetic little cone. He had no signal. Then, the power surged back. The lights in his apartment and the hallway flickered on, humming with a sickly fluorescent buzz. A cold draft hit his face. It came from his front door. He crept toward it. The smart lock was still engaged. Red light, secure, but the draft was real, smelling of ozone and something damp, like a wet, earthen cellar. He pulled up the building's security feed on his laptop. He switched to the lobby camera, aiming it at the front gate. The glass doors were closed. The rain lashed against them. The crimson cords the Mudang had tied were snapped. They hung in wet, limp threads. The iron key was gone. A sound made him freeze. It was not from the hallway. Click. It was from inside his apartment. It was coming from the kitchen. Seojun's blood turned to ice water. He backed away, his eyes scanning the dark corners of his own home. Click, click. It was closer. It was by the laundry nook. He had locked himself in. He was locked in with it. Click, click, click. It was right outside his bedroom door. The sound was different now. It wasn't a pebble. It was the sound of a key. A heavy, iron key, being slowly, deliberately turned in a lock that did not exist. It was the sound of Han itself. The unresolved sorrow that had been buried twice. And it had just found its way in. The truce was over. He didn't think. He didn't plan. Primal, unthinking terror took over. Character flees or abandons the place. He didn't grab his wallet. He didn't grab his laptop or his hard drives. His entire career. He grabbed his phone and the worn sneakers by his door. He slammed his hand on the open button of his smart lock, the mechanism whirring in protest. He ripped the door open. The hallway was flickering, the white light strobing like a failing, panicked heart. And the clicking was everywhere. It was coming from 1407, from 1410. It was coming from the ceiling vents and the emergency exit. The Han was loose. The entire building was a keyhole, and the key was turning in every single lock. He bolted for the stairwell. The elevator was a steel coffin. He knew it instinctively. He slammed through the heavy fire door. The stairwell was pitch black. The emergency lights were dead. Click, click, click. It was in the stairwell with him, echoing from above, rebounding from below. It was a countdown, a ratchet, a tightening. He took the stairs 4 at a time, his sneakers slapping on the concrete. He felt it, a brush against his back, a cold so intense it was like a wet, physical weight. It didn't push him, it clung. He screamed, a dry, ripping sound, and fell, tumbling down the last flight of stairs to the lobby. He scrambled to his feet, tasting blood from his lip. The main glass doors were wide open, the typhoon roaring inside. He didn't stop. He ran out into the lashing rain, not even feeling the cold. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs gave out, collapsing 6 blocks away in the flooded gutter of a 24-hour convenience store, the neon light of its sign washing over him in waves of green and red. Physical mental scars remain. He never went back. He abandoned his 10 million won deposit. He abandoned his monitors, his clothes, his books, his entire physical life. He paid a moving company an exorbitant fee to clear the apartment, instructing them to throw everything in an industrial incinerator. The movers thought he was insane. He didn't care. He lives in an old, noisy apartment now, in a different part of the city. It's small, the walls are thin, and he can hear his neighbours arguing. He loves it, but he is not the same. The man who valued silence is gone. Now, silence is his enemy. He sleeps with the television on, the meaningless chatter a shield against the quiet. He has developed a severe phobia of repetitive noises. A dripping tap, a ticking clock, the click, click, click of a colleague's ballpoint pen. Each one sends a jolt of ice-cold adrenaline through his heart. And there is a physical scar on his back, just over his left shoulder blade, where the thing in the stairwell touched him. There is a patch of skin, the size of a handprint, that is perpetually cold. He can take a scalding hot shower, and that one spot will remain icy, a frozen memory. Sense of barely surviving. Seo-jun survived, but he didn't win, and he didn't escape. He just left. He's alive, but a part of him is still back in apartment 1408, listening. He knows the Mudang was wrong about one thing. The iron key wasn't a lock, it was a plug. And the hand that was buried twice is now free, sometimes. When it's very late and the city outside is quiet, he can almost hear it. Faint, distant, but patient. Click, click, click. They replaced the entire gate assembly. The old, rusting iron grid that had guarded the entrance to B-Wing for half a century was torn out, its hinges groaning one last metallic complaint. In its place, our client, the new corporate owner of this decommissioned research base, installed a silent, high-speed roll door made of matte grey composite. It was state-of-the-art, magnetically sealed, and utterly quiet. It was also, as we discovered, a complete waste of money. The old gate had been our scapegoat for 3 weeks. My partner Jensen and I, heading the overnight security detail, had logged the sound, a rhythmic, metallic click, click, click. It came like clockwork around 0200, echoing from the B-Wing junction. We'd blamed the wind, we'd blamed thermal contraction. Most of all, we'd blamed those old rusted hinges. But that night, with the new, silent, composite gate sealed tight, the sound came back. It was 0203. I was at the main console, and Jensen was doing a perimeter sweep with Blitz, our K9. My radio crackled. "Rhodes!" Jensen's voice was tight. "You hearing this?" I was. The high-sensitivity mics we'd placed in the B-Wing corridor were picking it up, clear as a bell. Click, click, click. It wasn't a creak. It wasn't a groan. It was a sharp, distinct tap, like metal on terrazzo floor. And this time, without the gate to muffle it, I heard the rest. Step, click, step, step, click. It was a cadence. It was the sound of someone walking, pacing, carrying something that tapped the floor with every third step. It's louder. Rhodes, Jensen whispered over the radio. It's keeping pace with me. I'm in the main concourse, and it sounds like it's walking the parallel corridor, inside B-Wing. Hold your position, Jen. I'm checking the feed. I pulled up the B-Wing cameras. The hallway was empty. Dust motes danced in the infrared light. The new composite gate was a solid grey wall. Nothing was moving. Step, click, step. The audio feed told a different story. The sound was moving, coming from the gate, heading down the B-Wing hall, away from Jensen. It's on patrol, I said, my own voice sounding strange to me. Patrolling with us, Jensen corrected, in the dark. Then Blitz started. It wasn't a bark. It was a high-pitched, terrified keen. Over the radio, I heard a frantic scrabbling of claws on tile. Rhodes, Jensen shouted, his voice cracking. Blitz won't move. He won't go near B-Wing. I met him at the junction. The new gate stood there, impassive and modern. Blitz was 20 feet back, straining against his harness. His hackles raised into a solid ridge of fur. He was staring at the mouth of the hallway, not at the gate, but at the blackness beyond it. He whimpered, licked his lips, and backed away, dragging Jensen with him. The dog, a trained Dutch shepherd who had cleared rooms with armed squatters, was utterly terrified. He was seeing something that we couldn't. And the sound continued, now fading down the hall. Step, click, step. That was the breaking point. This wasn't faulty hardware. This wasn't the wind. This was an event. This was a presence, and it was observing a routine. I'm done guessing, I told Jensen, unclipping Blitz and taking the trembling animal back to the kennels. The client wants this place sterile by morning. I'm going to find out what's buried here. While Jensen watched the monitors, I took a maglite and a set of bolt cutters to the old admin block. The building was slated for demolition. The files supposedly digitized and shredded. But they'd missed a room. The old site manager's office, locked, its door swollen in the frame. I cut the padlock and forced it open. The smell of mildew and rotting paper hit me like a physical blow. Decades of files, sagging on rust-spotted shelves. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Old blueprints, incident reports. I started pulling binders, labelled with faded Dymo tape. Reactor core, personnel, security roster, 1970 to 1980. I hit pay dirt. I pulled the security roster. It was a thick, leather-bound ledger. I thumbed through the pages, my light landing on duty logs from the 1970s. When this place was a black-budget Cold War project, the names were just names, until I found a string of complaints, not against a person, but by one. S.M. Thorne requests formal reprimand for Dr. Aris's team. Sloppy containment protocols. S.M. Thorne reports B-Wing automated security grid failure. Again. S.M. Thorne formally protests Project Chimera as a breach of military ethics. S.M. Thorne. Sergeant Major Thorne. He was the head of security for this entire facility from 1968 until... I flipped to the end of the 1975 section. His name just stopped. I dug deeper. Tucked in the back of the cabinet was a thin file marked B-Wing Incident 10.227.75. It wasn't a formal report. It was a stack of witness statements, typed on onion skin paper. They described a catastrophic containment breach. A biological agent, the Project Chimera Thorne had protested, had gotten loose in B-Wing. The new, automated steel doors had failed to seal. The electronic systems, the pride of the facility, were useless. The scientists panicked. They evacuated. The base commander ordered a full site lockdown, which meant sealing B-Wing manually. Someone had to go inside, down the main corridor, to a manual override panel and turn a set of physical lock wheels. The scientist didn't know how. The commander was in the primary bunker. The last statement was from a young private, a gate guard. I saw the lights go red in B-wing. The alarms were screaming. The science team ran right past me. One of them was crying. Then Sergeant Major Thorne came walking. Not running. Walking. He had his pace stick under his arm. He looked at me, and I'll never forget it. He just said, "The post is compromised. I am resuming manual protocol." He walked straight into the red zone. He never came out. They sealed the main doors behind him. We could hear things. For an hour. Then nothing. My blood ran cold. I dug through the personnel file until I found it. A black and white 8x10. A stern, unsmiling man in a crisp uniform, jaw set like granite. In his left hand, held with military precision, was a long, polished wooden pace stick tipped with gleaming brass. Suddenly, every piece clicked into place. A terrible, perfect mosaic. The clicking, it wasn't a hinge. It was the brass tip of Sergeant Major Thorne's pace stick, striking the terrazzo floor. Step, click, step, step, click. It was the cadence of a formal patrol. A drill-perfect NCO walking his post, the hallway. It was B-wing, the place he died, the post he refused to abandon, even as a biological horror tore the air apart around him. He died on his feet, walking his route, the new gate. They had replaced the old metal with silent composite, but the soul of the place, Thorne's soul, was still there. The sound wasn't the gate itself. The gate had just been a physical object the entity's memory had latched onto. When the object was removed, the sound remained, purer, no longer needing a physical excuse to exist. The K9. Blitz wasn't scared of a sound. He was scared of the man. He saw what we couldn't. A sergeant major, radiating an aura of cold, undiluted duty, appearing at the head of the corridor, a figure of authority so potent that death itself couldn't relieve him from his post. And the patrol. "He's walking patrol with us," Jensen had said. My God, he wasn't haunting us. He wasn't a threat. He was inspecting us. We were the new security detail on his base. He was the old guard, the one who had never clocked out. He was walking his route, checking his post, and finding it. And us, still here. I grabbed the file and the photograph and walked back to the junction. Jensen was there, leaning against the wall, trying not to look down the black moor of B-wing. "I know who it is," I said, my voice hoarse. I held out the photograph. His name was Sergeant Major Thorne. He died in there. He was the only one who didn't run. Jensen looked at the stern face in the photo, then at the hallway. He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "So, what do we do, boss? Call the client? Call an exorcist?" I looked from the photo to the dark corridor. I thought of the man who walked into certain death because it was his duty. I thought of his stubborn, unending loyalty. "No," I said. "We do nothing." As if summoned by my words, the sound began again, far down the hall. But this time, it was coming toward us. Step, click. Step, step, click. Step. It was the sound of an NCO approaching. "We're on his post. Jensen," I said, straightening my back. "We stand fast. We show the sergeant major professional courtesy. What do you think is really waiting for the last train at Dongdaemun? Is it just the echo of a long-gone traveller? Or is it something more sinister, trapped by the weight of its own past? In many East Asian cultures, particularly in Korea, there is a strong belief that places and objects can absorb the emotions and memories of those who have passed through. This concept is often tied to Han, a profound sense of unresolved sorrow or deep-seated resentment that lingers in the physical world. Dongdaemun, as one of Seoul's ancient great gates, has witnessed centuries of history, countless farewells, tragedies, and moments of intense emotion. It's believed these powerful energies can stain a location, creating a spiritual imprint. That metallic click isn't just the sound of old metal, it's the echo of a memory, a spirit still pulling at the gate, refusing to be forgotten. Have you ever felt an unexplainable presence in a place heavy with history? Share your own theories and supernatural encounters in the comments below. If you enjoy exploring the dark folklore and chilling urban legends that hide just beneath the surface, make sure to subscribe and turn on all notifications. You won't want to miss the terrifying stories we have waiting in the shadows.